So I'm no legal expert, so I'm not sure of the legality of suing a podcast for false advertisement. So if anyone knows that, you could hop into the chat and let me know whether we can do that or not. Because a couple months ago, as some of you guys who are familiar with the channel probably know, the MacArthur Center for Expository Preaching, which again is not about expository preaching, is actually just about Johnny Mac. But that podcast released an episode, a trailer, where they were talking about announcing the next JMac. That's the phrase that they used. And they decided that they weren't going to do that necessarily. And this is where a lot of confusion has come. So they said that they were going to do that. And then Phil Johnson went on to Twitter and was like, no, you guys misheard him. He didn't say he was going to announce the next JMac, which is exactly what he did, by the way. But, everyone was like, okay, I guess they're not going to do that, because Phil was like, oh, you guys are throwing around gossip. It's not something that he would do on a podcast. Don't be ridiculous, like that kind of thing. And a lot of us did say it's kind of ridiculous to announce the successor on a podcast, but whatever. So it was like, okay, I guess he was just trying to get views. Austin Duncan, who runs the MacArthur Center for Expository Preaching, which is an about expository preaching podcast, he was just trying to get views, which is like, okay, whatever. I live on YouTube. I understand. Sometimes you put things a little bit differently just to try to get people interested. A week ago or a couple weeks ago, with their last episode about John MacArthur and the government, which again was just like a real snoozer, so you don't need to listen to it. But at the end, they announced that they were going to talk about John MacArthur and the successor. Well, today they released that episode, and they announced the successor. Let's go over here and let's listen to what they had to say.
Someone else. Those gifted men are MacArthur's successors. Rather than looking for the next John MacArthur, the succession plan has been in effect since the earliest days of John's ministry, and he will continue to entrust God's truth to God's men for the advancement of God's kingdom.
Okay, so I guess the real successor is the friends we made along the way, right? All right, I am going to go at this a little bit, and some of you guys might be like, Dean, it's okay. Like, that's a good thing, isn't it? To not have it focus on one man. Of course, I believe in a plurality of elders. I actually think that the approach that they're going with is probably the best approach. But I didn't make those podcasts. All right. I reacted to one, and actually I'm fairly confident because, I put out a video and, it got some views. And so, I think this is me.
The internet took more than a passing interest in those questions. Someone on Twitter said John MacArthur.
So he's talking about when he put out the trailer, and he was like, oh, people got interested. Yeah, no crap.
Arthur was going to announce his successor in July. That's 5 months ago. Still no smoke from the Vatican. One guy on YouTube analyzed everything I said, breaking down the meaning of each word. There was plenty of false information and a lot of interest in the topic. That wasn't surprising. Those questions have come up again and again over the years.
Oh,
after the trailer controversy died down,
the trailer controversy that you started. This is you know that meme where it's like there's the guy who's on a stage and he shoots somebody in the back and he says who would do this? That's what this was. No one was talking about Johnny Mac's successor until you announced, Austin, that you were going to put it on the podcast of who the successor was going to be. Now, I did an episode, or I talked about it on Underdog Theology, which is the show I do on Mondays. If you're not subscribed, hey, think about subscribing. I do a live show every single Monday. But we talked a little bit about who that could be, and we had some fun with it. So You Think You Can Mac is the name of the segment that I made. So we looked at some of those guys, and we had some fun. Honestly, I didn't think that they would actually announce it, but I was like, I'm not going to accuse a guy of doing like a big Jesus juke when he said like words he wants to say, like, oh, somebody on YouTube was like looking at every word. Like, you mean like taking you literally? Like, what? And if you guys, hey, I see some people hopping in the chat. We're going to do an AMA after. We're going to do an afterlife stream. But like, hey, here's some clickbait. Like, that's what they said on the podcast, and that's why I announced, like, that's why I kept the thumbnail. So if you guys are mad, if anyone is mad, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, Jeffrey, but if anyone is mad about this video, about the thumbnail, go take it up with Austin Duncan. Because he's the one who started it. He's the one who decided that's what he was going to say. When no one else was talking about it, he's the one who said, I'm going to announce the successor. And the successor is the real disciples we made along the way. I thought that that's actually what they were going to do, but I was trying to be nice and be like, oh, this guy, I don't want to just accuse him of just being like, you know, someone who's going to Jesus juke everyone, when he was like, if you look at his wording, you know, he wants to get on me about looking at every single word. I'm sorry, but that's what words mean. You know, when you say, we're going to announce the successor, and it's singular, like, you don't get to come on a podcast and then say, the successor, singular, is all the elders that we currently have. What? Like, come on. You know what you were doing. Like, this is just a little bit frustrating. You know, these guys get on a lot of celebrity pastors for talking about things in a certain way and trying to get people, you know, butts in seats in church. Well, this is kind of what they did with a podcast. This is interesting. So let's look at a few of the other things that they had to say, because it was actually pretty interesting the way that they went about it. So they announced, you know, there's not going like this. Actually, they had this whole long episode that was really like convoluted about the idea of succession. And they talked to some interesting people, actually. Let's see. I think this is the right one, but let's go over here and let's listen to one of the people that they decided this person's an expert on the idea of succession.
Grace Church isn't going to hire a headhunting firm.
Oh, that's not it.
Their own way, each making their own contributions, instead of vesting that legacy in one man, which I think is really can be a setup for failure. And for teachers who have a uniquely global impact, this only makes sense anyways, really, to think of the legacy in broader terms than just one man, because
this is Tony Reinke. He's written some decent books about technology and how Christians can use technology, but he is one of the main guys over at Desiring God. So this is like, let that kind of shape what you hear next about this idea of succession from John Piper's camp, which, if you look at it, all right, spoilers, the succession plan did not go great. All right, at Bethlehem Seminary. I'm not trying to like make light of people who got hurt there, but you know, they made a big show of, you know, John Piper's successor being Joshua Mayer. I should have looked this up. I forget, but the pastor who was there, no longer there. But okay, let's talk to them about succession.
You know, in such a case, a man's enduring legacy should never be restricted to one geographic location. It needs to be appreciated in the thousands of lives that he has touched, and the hundreds, if not thousands, maybe 10,000s of pastors that he has equipped and inspired to ministry faithfulness in the gospel. We settled on thinking in terms of succession as a team of men. A team of senior teachers and staff who will steward Pastor John's teaching legacy, you know, what we call Christian hedonism. and by doing the ongoing work together and collectively. There's no John Piper number 2. There's one John Piper.
Okay. So he talks to Desiring God about succession, which all right, if you want to bifurcate, Bethlehem College Seminary from, Bethlehem Church and Desiring God, and you separate all these things, you can look at it and say, well, they got 2 for 3. But like, I don't know if I would be like, this is the example that we need to talk to about succession, because that didn't work, not all the way at least. So, but yeah, I was listening to this, and first right off the bat, kind of throwing a certain YouTuber under the bus. I was like, okay, all right, gloves are coming off, but come on, all right, I want to know. All right, just being serious for a minute. Is this lying? Like, the trailer said that we will announce the successor. They doubled down on that by announcing it once again that they were going to talk about the successor, singular. They make an episode called John MacArthur and the Successor, and then they say that the successors are the elders that they already have, which again, theologically, I don't have a disagreement with. I will say, like, there's one thing. Let's listen to one more thing. I want to know, though. Let me know in the comments below, or maybe in the chat. Is this lying, or is this is this a Jesus juke that you find like appropriate, or is this just straight up lying? Because I'm really on the verge. I don't really know what to make of it. But let's look at just one last little clip out from this thing, because he says something that I find very interesting, and I don't know if it's completely accurate.
Grace Church isn't going to hire a headhunting firm to gather resumes to find the next pastor of preaching and vision. They don't need that, because MacArthur has given Grace Church's leaders and its people the right perspective on spiritual leadership and pastoral ministry. Also, the church is well defined in her priorities and doctrine. So even though there is no second John MacArthur, there are plenty of men who will hold to the same body of truth he does.
All right, so that part of like, he's prepared them so they're ready and they don't need, someone to step in. Like, I understand, doing like actual like expository preaching, which I'm for, which apparently this podcast is not actually about. Once again, just not about it. Expository preaching, not talking about that. But if you're going to do expository preaching, you're discipling your congregation in that way. You're preparing them because you're walking them through scriptures verse by verse, book by book. You're training them up. You're giving them so much knowledge and wisdom. I get that, the idea of them being prepared. But here's the thing. Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the mouth, right? Like, that's the famous saying. Everybody has a plan of what they're going to do until they're punched in the mouth. And for them to say like, oh, well, they don't need it because they're prepared and this is how it's going to be. Okay, but don't be so prideful in saying like, oh, we know this is how it's going to be. It's going to be fine. And looking at churches who are built, even if it's good preaching, I'm talking about, people like Martin Lloyd-Jones. I'm talking about people like John Bunyan. I'm talking about people like Charles Spurgeon back there. Even good preachers, when it's focused on a person, a lot of times that ministry isn't going to be as fruitful later on. So like to say like, oh, things are just going to carry on. It's just going to be the same thing. Like, I understand that theologically, that should work, but let's be a little bit more careful than just saying like, this is definitely how it's going to go. And also, don't blame us for talking about it. Like, I'll end with that. Don't blame us, Austin, for talking about the thing that you started. You started this storm. You want to talk about, oh, the storm died down and I was able to talk to Johnny Mac about, what he thought about all of this, which, by the way, if you listen to the podcast, he was like, well, that's understandable. So there you go, Austin. But don't be like, oh, you guys are so materialistic. Just, you want to talk about people. You announced it. And you knew it would work. You knew that I'd listen. You knew that other people would listen because you put it in the title. Come on, man. Who's the real YouTuber here? Me? Or maybe you? YouTube, if you're watching on the replay, they're going to have a video that they think that you should watch that is appropriate for this, so maybe click on that. If you're here live, this is going to redirect in about 30 seconds to an AMA where we can talk a little bit more about this, and we'll have some fun over there. I will see you over there.